That was a nice clap, dude. You're practicing.
Every time you do that, I can tell this room needs acoustic treatment.
You can hear
because it
the ring
smatters around. All right. Well.
My hearing's not that good. I'm like,
False start. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Tabernacle Podcast. We are Tabernacle Worship. We're the worship department, the worship ministry, Trinity Fellowship Church based in Amarillo, Texas. We are one church with many campuses. We have several physical campuses around Texas, and then we also have an amazing online campus. I am Teal Merrick. This is Phil King, and this is Stephen Ronk.
Hey.
We are all on staff here at Trinity Fellowship, and we can't do this podcast without Trinity Fellowship. So,
amen. Yeah.
So,
thank you, TFC.
Now,
glad to be here.
We are getting to jump back in after a little bit of we had a 2-week break, and we're here now to jump right back into why lyrics matter. And
part four.
This is the fourth part with no real end in sight. So we're just going to jump right into it. Philip, Charles, Thaddeus King.
That's my name.
Man.
Go ahead and let's
name.
launch
All right.
into this.
How's everybody doing? So I noticed on the last podcast when I listened, I was kind of mumbling a little bit, so I'm going to try to do better to move my mouth while I'm
Enunciate.
Well,
talking.
that cameras are really close to your face. It'd be
Yes.
you can do a lot of John Mayer.
A zoom.
It's like I like what you sound like, but I can't watch you.
Like,
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, this is
All
falling
right.
right off the cliff.
Well,
Okay, let's jump into
So
it.
we're jumping back into it. Sorry, guys. We had my worst nightmare of everyone in our household getting sick in layers. So that's why I was gone. Glad to be back. Thankful to be back. Pretty cool. So we talked a little bit when I was last here about not so great songs and kind of the ethereal, moody, soulish, sometimes sensual, actually I'll say very sensual, side of lyrics that has over time made its way into the church as far as what we're singing. I think a lot of songs today, if you were to try to insert them into hymnals from the 1950s and before, or 60s and before, it wouldn't happen. You would be shocked. And so it's like, why is that? You know, you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of sound theology and incredible, rock-solid lyrics being sung by the church, and all of a sudden in the last couple decades, it's like, boom, you know, you just have this explosion. So we talked a lot about that, and that kind of leads us into what I was mentioning, and we kind of jumped around in the last podcast. We're going to do our best to keep on track for our listeners here. And thank you for listening. We love having you guys here, and it's cool to see all the comments and what you guys say. And, hey, comment. Get involved with the conversation. If you have questions, hit us up. We're not experts, but we're learning just like you guys are, and we really love studying this, so it's worth it. And I say we're not experts, but we do this a lot, so that's why we're doing this. Anyways. So we talked about King David a little bit, and what I kind of wanted to touch on was King David. I did this amazing research study, and Talon, if you do want to put up, it is on slide, I believe, 28. There is a link to this if you want to go look at it yourself. It's phenomenal. Somebody took the time and actually put in chronological order every psalm that David wrote. So it's not like Psalm 1 to Psalm 150 like in our Bible. And I believe the book of Psalms is actually broken up into 3 or 4 sections.
5 books.
Oh, there's 5.
5, yeah, 5.
Wow, I didn't know that. There's the Psalms of Ascents, then there's just different kinds, and there's a section where it's mostly Asaph and the sons of Korah, then there's sections where it's a lot of David. So there's a modern way that it's broken up, but somebody went beyond that and said, I want to take the life of David in song that we have record of and go front to back. And it's amazing. And this really all started, I believe, when God struck Uzzah, who was one of David's homies that was assigned to take the ark from, was it Shiloh? Was that where the ark was at before David came and got it?
It was so you got it back from the Philistines, right?
Yes.
And then it was stationed at someone's house.
No, that was
Obed-Edom.
Obed-Edom was after this incident happened. So, anyways, wherever the ark was,
It was from the Philistines to
Yes.
Obed-Edom's house, I believe.
No.
Right? No.
Uh-uh.
Okay.
It was.
Maybe not.
It went to Shiloh first, because remember they sent it back on a cart, and it just went. And they're like, if it goes to this place, then we'll know that God has been the one that's been striking us with all of these tumors and all that crazy stuff that was going on. So, anyways, from somewhere in the land of Israel that was on the border with Philistia, David, that's
Its proper pronunciation.
best I can do. David puts in a request and says, hey, I want to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. So he goes and he gets the ark. Well, as they're walking along, trotting along, they put the ark on a cart, which was not the right way to do it. Uzzah reached out because the ark was coming off of the cart to steady it and to hold it up, which seems like a good thing, right? Seems like a great thing. Well, up until that point, what the Israelites had been doing, all of it was a no-no. They had not been carrying the ark the right way, transporting it the right way, doing it God's way. And Uzzah, a man, reached out and touched God's holy presence that was on the ark, in the ark, around the ark. And it's a beautiful thing, a lot going on there that we get in another episode, or probably already has been covered on this episode. God kills Uzzah, just right there, just strikes him, and he's gone. And then at that point is when they say, hey, house of Obed-Edom, we happen to be here on your property. Can we park this thing here while we figure this out? So David goes back to Jerusalem, calls all the scribes up, and is like, hey, what was that all about? And so they start digging up the covenant that God gave to Moses at Sinai, which is what we're all about here. That's why we're called Tabernacle. It's why we do the Tabernacle Flow. And as he does this research, all of a sudden he realizes, oh my goodness, yes, I love God so much. My heart loves the Lord, but I've not been worshiping him in his prescribed way, in the way that he wants to be worshiped. So what you see there, as David starts digging up scripture, starts researching the way that God wants to be worshiped, as he gave to Moses, as he presented himself on Mount Sinai, all of a sudden David's songs start to change, and the tone starts to change, and the posture starts to change. The reverence starts to change. The holiness starts to change. And Psalm 97 is one of the 4 psalms that David wrote once the ark was returned to Jerusalem. So there were 4 psalms that he wrote for the occasion, specifically he wrote 4 songs for when the ark finally came to Jerusalem. And when you read Psalm 97, which is on slide 28, it is phenomenal. Like, the tone, it's so much of it could be actually that huge Michael W. Smith worship album. This was part of what was read when they were singing Let It Rain. You know, that guy with that big South African accent comes up and he starts with, the Lord reigns, blah, 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 let the earth be glad, the mountains melt like wax, blah, 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 blah. Well, he was actually reading from the psalm that David wrote on the presence of God being stationed in Jerusalem, coming to its rightful place, to Zion. So, super, super cool. So anyways, what I did here is I put on the slide before the first psalm that David wrote, which is Psalm 39, first song he ever wrote, which would have been after Samuel had anointed him. And I compared it, contrasted it to the last psalm David wrote. Some believe these were some of his last words. So Psalm 138 versus Psalm 39, and that's on slide 27, Talon. But there's a stark difference. And a lot of it, I believe, is what we were talking about in the episode before. And 2 things I want to say is, if God killed Uzzah to send David the message, and this is David, like the psalmist, the sweet psalmist, shepherd of Israel, the one that, you know, the Messiah, Jesus would be called the son of David. If God was willing to correct him that strongly, and we see this at other points in his life too, over how he was worshiping the Lord, what makes us think that we don't get that as well? What makes us think that we shouldn't be and at any point examining how we're coming to God in worship. That is such a big question. And then also the second thing is, if this affected David the way that it did, that we can see lyrically based on this study, which is phenomenal. You should all go look this up and look up that link and go check it out. Shouldn't we also, as we grow in Jesus and grow up in the Lord, shouldn't that be playing out in our songs as well? So anyways, I'll just kind of pause it there. I've been talking a while, just kind of setting us up for today. But basically, it just brings up one more thing too. That's on this picture with Uzzah. Not all acts of worship are sanctioned or approved of by God.
Sure.
And that's crazy. Like, to think I could be in something that I think is a worship service or moment or environment or even in an arena, and God's up there like, no. And what's crazy is based on the story of the sons of Eli, it says when they showed up at the camp, if you go and look in 1 Samuel, when they showed up at the camp with the ark of God, which is when it was lost, that's the moment when it was given to the Philistines, when God was like, peace out, and Ichabod was born, and Ichabod means the glory has departed. The glory of God's presence has left us. When Eli's son showed up to the camp, there was a loud roar, such a loud thunder and shouts of praise that it says it actually scared the Philistines, and they said, "Oh no, God's shown up. We're done." And what that communicates to me is we have a lot of loud roars in worship today, loud moments, loud, big, bad, awesome worship things, but God could like not be for it.
Sure.
Which is crazy, but He's so holy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
And there's many like things we could jump off into. So sorry to answer to answer your question earlier. It was Bela. Kiriath.
That's right.
Jearim. It's right on the border there.
There were two roads, and it went to Bela, and the oxen.
Right there, and then that's where the incident happened.
What incident?
Where they retrieved the ark from.
Oh, okay.
So it was a border town.
Sent the ark from the Philistines.
So let me get this straight. They put the ark with no driver?
No driver. 2 oxen.
And just let the oxen go?
Yes, let them go.
Pointed them towards Israel.
What was their purpose in doing that?
They had been.
If it went
they
right
had
to Bela, then they were going. Yeah.
Just so that we're all on the same page here, the Philistines were having their whole world wrecked by owning and having stolen, or I guess taken. They stole the Ark of the Covenant. It's in their camp. This was kind of their big like, hey, we got you. We took all your power. Was happening to the Philistines that eventually they're like, get this thing out of here.
So first they put in the temple of Molech. And when they put the Ark of the Covenant in Molech, they show up after night 1, and Dagon is face down and towards the Ark. Well, they prop him back up. Next day they come in, he's face down again, and his arms and his legs are off. Yep. So they can't even stand him back up. Well, they didn't get the clue. Well, then God starts breaking out against them and the cities around them, because they actually tried passing the ark around within Philistia to see if, okay, maybe it'll be okay if we go here. Well, in every place where they set the Ark of the Covenant, everyone got tumors, like horrible tumors.
Oh my!
Everybody, which we would call cancer. Everyone immediately got life-threatening cancer.
Illness.
God started breaking out against everybody. So actually, and I think there was a plague of rats as well.
Yeah,
because
golden rats.
They put.
What did you say?
Rats.
Golden rats.
Hold up.
No, they put golden rats. This is the Bible, y'all.
Hold up. Golden rats? How's this the first time that I'm hearing about golden rats?
Ronk jumped the gun there.
Sorry. Yes.
That was the penitence offering that the Philistines offered. So they put on this cart of the oxen. They said, okay, if this goes right, turns right, and goes to Bela, then we'll know this was God and we're forgiven. If it goes left, then that would be like, okay, we're screwed and there's nothing we can do about this. And God's just, we're done. So anyways, they load up as an offering, as a guilt offering to the best. They didn't know what to do. They're not God's people. They don't have the law. So they made gold tumors, 5 of them, and 5 gold rats.
What?
As like solid
golden
gold.
tumors?
Yeah, like they made tumors.
Oh my, okay.
Yeah, they fashioned them, put them on the cart.
Okay.
As a, hey, we're sorry,
like
gesture.
Let's hold up about 18 seconds here.
1,
because this is
2.
This is just the wildest thing. And I know that I think I've heard about this, but this is definitely like, what page did I skip? Okay, so just for reference here, if you're curious if the Bible is boring, this is your clue that it is not. Okay, people fashioned golden tumors. I don't even know what that look like.
Like
a little brain.
It cracks me up thinking about the Philistines doing their best.
Yeah.
To try and get this thing.
Well, you think about how they
out
related to Dagon or their pantheon of gods. I'm sure there was some sort of like, if something comes against you, you offer it back to the gods, or you make some replica of it and bring it to the temple, and some sort of like some sort of
But there was a real plague of rats.
Yes, real plague of rats and real tumors. That
my
were,
brain,
that
when
were
you said golden rats, my brain literally went to.
Well, some people translate tumors something different too. They translate
to what?
To hemorrhoids.
Yeah. So
yes.
No, they were saying hemorrhoids.
Oh my gosh!
I've clicked on the hyperlink before, and I remember
most people
thinking
translate
in my mind,
hemorrhoids.
Oh my gosh, everyone's bowels.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
So not even golden
I feel
tumors,
like I am,
but a golden hemorrhoid.
I feel like I am getting complete. Like this is like.
Yeah.
I turned off the VHS tape early and
this
didn't
is
even catch this part of the movie.
The Ron Wyatt tape.
This is unreal.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so oh my gosh, dude.
This all leads up to
this. No.
This
oh my gosh.
This all leads up to that moment though, where the cart comes back to Israel.
Which is why God would have been angry, because the Israelites just continued carrying God's presence the way that the Philistines returned it, if that makes sense. There's a picture there of.
That's pretty interesting.
They might not have even taken it off the cart. Like it was on the same cart.
Sure, they're like, cool, this thing just...
this will work.
I just need a little more clarification.
Yeah.
This thing just traveled by oxen until the Israelites ran into it?
No, actually there were men plowing a field about, I don't know if there's a number, but there were men plowing a field, and when they looked up, they saw it coming over the hill, and the Israelites were like, oh my gosh. So these farmers found it.
It just is going by itself.
Yep, all by itself.
This is so wild.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. Totally on its own.
That is so nuts.
Just set the oxen off and here.
And as soon as it crosses over into Israelite territory, the Philistines are like, sweet, we're good. And then all of them are all of a sudden better. Because we see in the life of Saul and David, there's obviously Philistines left that are fighting. So, and what's crazy is like, if you put a timeline to this, it would have explained a lot of like why, I don't know, Goliath would have been so angry at, I mean, can you imagine him as a little giant baby and all of a sudden he has major hemorrhoids? I mean, I'd be mad. I'd have a grudge against that God. Like there's a lot.
That's pretty interesting.
There's a lot going on there.
But.
Yeah. So this would have been, I mean, I believe it was years, because if it's based on Eli and the day that he died, David probably not born yet.
This incident?
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, this incident.
Well,
then David retrieved it years later. Saul never took interest in the presence of God coming back. He just left it where it was.
I never realized that there was a period of time in between when they went and retrieved it.
So it's huge.
Interesting.
And that's one of the ways that David, I believe, he earned so much favor with God, was he's like, I'll go. I'll go retrieve the ark.
So hold up. This, man.
Sorry, we're
No,
going.
no. This is fantastic. But just to clarify the timeline.
Yeah.
Philistines have it. Is David around at this period in time?
Might not be. If he was tiny.
Okay. So Philistines take it. They send it on the magical oxen cart.
Because Samuel was young when this happened.
Okay, so who like just the Israelite people find the ark
Yeah.
rolling around.
Yeah, and it's just parked in Bela, which I believe is near Shiloh.
They just parked it. Okay.
Just parked it there.
What the heck?
Yep. And then there were people that would
My brain is melting.
go up to it, and there were actually priests or some form of priesthood that actually served and kept watch over it while it was where it was at. And that's where David goes, and he's bringing it back. And as he's bringing it back in the same fashion. And if you remember in Exodus, the Lord said to the Israelites, when you enter the land I'm giving you, you are not to worship me in the same way that pagans worship their gods. Very explicit command there. And in doing this was a huge violation of how God wanted his presence to be carried. And so Uzzah is gone, boom. And
Well, so hang on before this is interesting because that point is over and over and over and over and over again emphasized throughout the book of Exodus, where God is reminding the Israelites, because they're coming from, let's roll the tape back. They're coming out of Egypt, and they've lived in Egypt for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of ancestors have come and gone in their time, so they've adopted they've adopted a lot of things from the Egyptians, including probably how to worship their gods. And God over and over again is telling them, do not worship me the way you worship them. Telling them, don't make avatars, don't make little, tchotchkes of me, don't make little wooden figurines. Like, that's not how I function. And so it's interesting that this is like, so here's my other point. As you're talking through this, I even think that it's worth discussing or even reframing, did God kill Uzzah? Or was Uzzah's casualty because of, look, I told you what the presence was. God wasn't waiting and being like, if he touches it, you're gone. Does that make sense? Like,
like touching plutonium.
Yeah, so like if you go out in the middle of a tornado and you get sucked up and blown away and someone's like, man, tornadoes are jerks. They hunted, they killed my friend. No, well, your friend wasn't, like, you weren't playing by the rules. God had, and I guess some of this too goes back to the responsibility of who's caravanning this Ark of the Covenant from one place to the next, is like you said, if these are on the shoulders of guys, it's not tipping over. Because the men carrying it function like the shocks on a vehicle does. But if this thing's on a cart, and you roll down in a ravine, it's gonna fall off. Yeah. Which I can't even imagine what would have happened if it falls off and opens up and.
Right.
I mean, Uzzah took one for the team.
I mean, we've seen Indiana Jones,
when
they crack open the Ark of the Covenant.
Dude,
that scene haunts me still as a child.
We saw that in
Indiana Jones. The melted candle, man.
Oh man.
Anyways, but that's an interesting point, is that I don't even know if it's necessarily accurate to say God killed Uzzah because Uzzah did a wrong thing.
Right.
The whole party transporting is responsible for Uzzah's death. Uzzah's a casualty of the disobedience and the carelessness, which I'm not trying to work us into this, but I'm thinking through, if we are careless with the presence of God, if we're careless with what our role is, there can be fallout. Not that it all hinges on us, but I'm sure those guys transporting were just like, that's fine. That's how it showed up. It was on a cart. Great. Great. So it's oxen are here, the whole thing. Let's just keep rolling.
The whole culture and the whole, like, their whole cumulative belief system was wrong, or it had slowly kind of been shifted. It wasn't like it was just out of nowhere that Uzzah
Which that's
decided
us
to do something
today,
crazy. That was like way against anything that anybody else was doing. He was just the one who
you
happened
plug in
to,
anybody in his spot, they're going to do the exact same thing.
Right.
The ark should have never been, or the presence of God should have never been in that position in the first place.
For sure.
Because it was incorrectly being transported.
Yeah.
From the get-go.
Right.
And
sorry, it should have never been presumptively lost either to the Philistines in the first place, which is what even so all the way back to the original reason it was lost in the first place.
The God's presence goes away, and they lose context of what it's like to be in the presence of God.
Sure,
for
you lose
a long
context
period of time. Of reverence, of fear, awe, wonder. You lose the context of that. So when it shows up, you're like, oh, hey, there's that golden thing that Grandpa always used to talk about, or great grandpa used to talk about. Like, okay, cool. I guess we'll take that back to, wherever. But like the absence of it kind of aided in this concept of them not being able to understand the importance or the severity connected to it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is what it goes back to. And I would like to relate this to the church today where we're at, because there's a great lesson learned here. But it all started with Eli.
Yeah.
This problem here, if you go back a couple generations, started with Eli not rebuking and correcting his sons. And the Lord actually, through Samuel, said that to Eli.
Now, for our listeners, will you give a brief summary of that situation?
So Eli was the high priest in the line of Aaron. So he's in Aaron's seat, which was, we all know Moses and Aaron.
He's an OG.
Yeah. And his sons, where's his name's Hophni and Phinehas?
No, that's
those are the Egyptian guys. The bad.
Well,
the sons of Eli. I need to look this up
real quick
because it'll help. Eli names of Eli's son. Yeah, Hophni and Phinehas.
Hey,
boom.
You knew it.
Wow, how do I know that? That's weird.
That's good.
But anyways, so Hophni and Phinehas were casual around the presence of God, and it actually says that when people would bring their food offerings to God, they would purposefully tell people, "Hey, we want that cut of meat right there," and they would continually go after. This is in the Bible. The best fattened portions of meat, which belong to the Lord, and which really they weren't supposed to be eating. And also the girls that would come to the tabernacle that they were interested in, they just would hook up with them, and they would do that. There was promiscuity and greed happening in the presence of God.
Oh man,
continually.
This doesn't feel like anything that's happening in the church currently at all.
Yeah, right. Near God's presence.
Syncretism.
And
syncretism?
And
is that a word?
Eli, what's a bummer? What's a bummer is like Eli seems like a great dude from what I can tell. He seems like the real deal. He seems like the OG that's been holding it down for a long time. But his error was, according to the Lord, you did not step up and rebuke them, and it actually says that he verbally did confront them, but what I believe the Lord wanted him to do was get them out, remove them
from the priesthood,
remove them from the priesthood entirely. And because of that situation, that's how we end up where we're at right here.
Wow.
And David, what the life of David and what David did that was special was, although he didn't do it perfectly, and if you look up the scripture, it actually does say, and to your point though, the tornado thing is very real, but the scripture actually does say the Lord broke out against Uzzah, and he was like, "Are you?" Yep.
Okay, then then disregard.
But to that point though, you get too close to a swirling thing, 300 miles an hour. What do you expect?
Sure.
So.
Still, the carelessness
yes.
of it is like God wasn't looking for someone to strike, but the
100%.
carelessness that had broken out amongst the people is what essentially led to that.
Right.
Dude, but
For
we
sure.
see it today, which I'm just going to go this direction. We see people overnight disappear in ministry, or overnight just take a hard left.
Yeah.
Overnight, their whole legacy's gone. Overnight, they're on the news. And this thing of carelessness about the presence of God is still so real. Paul actually upped the game. Jesus upped the game. Peter upped the game and said, if we're doing this to the cross in the new covenant, and they reference, and God did this with the old, like,
Yeah.
what in the world is there to keep us after we've, mocked the cross, basically?
Yeah.
So I think it's actually more serious now than it used to be under the old covenant. We read these things and we're like, whoa, but I think that there still is, and there's actually a more serious responsibility as ministers of the new covenant. Do we have all of these things and clothing items and ways we have to do this and that? No, not really. Jesus tore the veil, and now we're the temple.
Mm-hmm.
But because we're the temple, it's like my thoughts, my actions, my words, everything matters so much
For sure.
in keeping this in order. So, and that's going to come out in my songs, and that's going to come out in my decisions, my choices, how I treat people, lead people. So anyway, sorry we go a little deep there, but
No, that's good. That's good.
it's still happening today.
Well, gosh,
it really
when you talk about Eli's sons, it makes me think of things that you see happening in the modern church right now. I mean,
big time.
those two guys using their authority to take the best of what they want, to manipulate people around them, to be flippant with God's grace, to be careless with it, to be promiscuous, like all of those things. This is a very real parallel
sexual
to what's
promiscuity.
Yeah, I mean,
too,
my
like
gosh, man, it's
the
happening.
Looking like the people around you.
Yes.
That's
And blurring those lines, like those sons, the thing that separates them is what they refuse to take part in. So the difference between them being the priests is what separates them from being priests from the people on the outside of the temple is what they refuse to take part in. If you take part in all the same stuff that they do, you're no different. And so that's a part of it, is like, even if you take this to a bigger global picture, our call as Christians or becoming children of God is what we are choosing to not take part in.
Sure, absolutely.
That's good.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that I think is the interesting thing to me, is that it wasn't that one day they woke up and they were like, hey, let's hook up with some chicks at the temple. It was that over time, that permissiveness of, it's not that big of a deal. It's, like, hey, someone chose not to, like, why are you talking to her?
Right.
Why are we all over there talking separately? Why are you we're not supposed to take that. There are separate offerings that are given to us for sustenance. Why are you taking that? It's not that big of a deal. Like,
Yeah.
their choice to do all the things that the people on the outside of the temple are doing is what lumps them in with all those other people. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I want to be careful not to say like other people, like that, people who work in church. It's not even having to do with people who work in church. I want to get that out of our vernacular, period.
We're all priests.
If I'm a Christian,
Yep.
if I have professed Christ,
Yep.
and I need Christ and I've accepted him into my life and I want to live his way, it doesn't matter if I work here, if I work at a bank, whatever. I am laying down my preferences and I'm withholding myself from all kinds of things. Dude, it's not that big of a deal. Go have a conversation. Absolutely not. My choice to follow Christ is, there's a huge distinction of things I refuse to take part in.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that's the only distinction, but it's a huge distinction, right?
Sure.
Very huge.
The difference between a high priest and the people that that need the high priest are the things the high priest refuses to take part in.
For sure.
Why don't you just come grab a bite to eat? No. My job is here. The Lord will provide. I'll eat the showbread, and there will be offerings giving that'll be taken that I'll get taken care of in those kinds of ways. You know what I'm saying? Like that to me is what makes me think of in this situation is that line began to get blurred. And more those sons, and probably those people around him, because you're not going to surround yourselves with people who follow the rules if that's the case, right? You're going to surround yourself with more and more permissive people that aren't going to check you, you know? Mm-hmm. And over time, it becomes normal in the temple to behave this way until one day the Lord shows up and says, there were lots of opportunities. I warned you.
Yep.
And now we're going to clean this whole thing up.
There's going to be some sort of judgment or some sort of
Absolutely.
strong reaction against Uzzah. All this had played into that permissiveness, step by step, generation by generation, till all of a sudden it was like,
in a way, God was like, we're done with this.
Yeah.
So is all this,
the line's here. Yeah. You've crossed it.
So is all this stuff with Eli's sons, like that all is happening? Do the Philistines capturing the ark happen after this?
Let me read this paragraph. This might help like summarize kind of what we talked about and put into perspective the whole chronology. It's from a commentary on 1 Chronicles on the passage where 1 Chronicles 13 where David brings the ark back, or is starting to bring the ark back. The ark had originally been housed in Shiloh, the central sanctuary of Israel, before Saul's reign, but was lost to the Philistines in the infamous battle of 1 Samuel 4, where they sent the ark out presumptuously, thinking that the Philistines would be defeated because the ark was there, but God had removed his protection and his presence with the ark. After 7 months, it was promptly returned. So there's a 7-month period where it was in the Philistine camp, promptly returned to the Israelites because of the toll it was taking on the Philistine idols and people. In 1 Samuel 5 and 6 talks about this. The Philistines sent it off to the Israelite town of Beth Shemesh on a new cart pulled by cows. Several Israelites at Beth Shemesh were struck down for looking upon the ark, so they sent it off to Kiriath Jearim to the house of Abinadab,
Indiana Jones,
who consecrated his son Eleazar to superintend its care. This is in 1 Samuel 7. There it remained until David brought it to Jerusalem. So for a long time, it stayed in the house and Eleazar took care of the ark. Until we get to 2 Samuel. To transport the ark, however, people appeared to follow the precedent set by the Philistine priests, placing the ark on a new cart in 1 Chronicles 13:7. Guiding the cart were Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, who had established a shrine for the ark at Kiriath Jearim. The chronicler describes the scene as one of great joy and worship as David and all of Israel celebrated passionately with a variety of musical instruments, a foreshadowing of the musical tone of David's worship in the chapters that will follow. So before they got it right, they were still passionately worshiping with all their emotions and all their might before the Lord, but they were doing it wrong. Sorry, that one gave me the chills a little bit. But 1 Chronicles 15 talks about after he had gone back and pulled up the Mosaic regulations for worship. He brings the Levites with him and retrieves the ark and does it right with the same fanfare and the same volume, the same musical accompaniment. But this time it's approved by the Lord, and this time the Lord blesses him and he comes back, and that's where the famous incident with Saul's daughter, where she calls him a fool for dancing. But they came the first time with tons of zeal and tons of passion, tons of emotion. But it was wrong.
I'm so blown away by them sending out the ark and trying to manipulate the presence of God to defeat the Philistines, and God's like, I won't do that.
Yeah, I love the ark to be captured.
You're not going to use me that way.
And this was right after it was what Phil was talking about with Hophni and Phinehas. This was right after that.
Well, yeah. So they would.
So okay. So that's the thing I was trying to clear up. So this permissiveness is going on in the temple.
Tabernacle.
In the tabernacle. Yeah. But I'm saying, so that's happening, which leads them to misuse the presence of God of like, yeah, just send out the cart and it'll knock them out. But I think that is what I'm fascinated by, is that two things. Let me get my thoughts together. Two things. They were still able to carry a certain amount of authority even though they were improperly manipulating the presence of God, which I think is a curious thing, because I think lots of times it's like, well, if I was doing the wrong thing, then I wouldn't still be doing this. The Lord's kind. You know what I'm saying? Like,
He let him do it for years.
Years this is going on, where the Lord's not like, hey, first time you screwed up, hey, get them out of here. But that transpired over a long period of time. And over that period of time, you lose fear, awe, and reverence of the presence of God. And so then when you need it, you're like, yeah, let's just do a revival. You know, I'm paraphrasing into modern day terms. Let's just do a big event. Let's invite in a big artist. Let's bring in a big speaker. That'll be great. It'll be awesome. You know what I'm saying? Like that, and I'm not trying to throw shade on the modern church. It's concerning to me, because those two sons probably at the time didn't realize how mixed up in it that they were. It just happens a little bit by little bit by little bit by little bit, and then you wake up one day and it's like, oh my gosh. You know what I'm saying? Like, we could name 10 or 15 major evangelists of the last 20 years. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts until one day they woke up and it was like a voice of reason came in and said, absolutely not. There's the line.
Yeah.
You've now crossed it.
Or CNN.
For sure.
And there's almost like a moment of like, finally, when a voice of correction steps in and says you're not going to go any further, it's like the veil's lifted from your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What have I done?
What have I done? What have I been doing?
Which is kind of what happened to David in that moment.
And my second thing to this that I think is, and I've been thinking about this a lot, the role of the father. Eli not stepping into his role as a father set this whole thing into motion. I'm not going to say it all sits on Eli, but the role of being a dad, the role of being a father, the role of being the spiritual leader of your home is no slouch gig. It's a really big deal. And Eli knew somewhere inside of him, I need to correct this. I need to deal with this. But what I would guess is that Eli's lackadaisical parenting was death by 1,000 paper cuts as well. Not addressing something. Can't talk like that. Can't act like that. You have to do these. You know what I'm saying? Like, till eventually you get to this point where you're like, I don't know, man. Like, it's just too much work. Like, I'm not going to mess with it.
Right.
I'm too exhausted.
I don't even know where to start.
I don't even know where to start.
Too far.
Because we've gotten so far. You know what I'm saying?
So, just for more context, there was a cauldron that was used in the tabernacle to, obviously it's not one of the items like what's on your shirt, but they would, great shirt by the way.
Plug.
Little plug right there.
tbrncl.com/shop.
Tabernacle merch. NBD.
But they would, the cauldron was used to boil the meat before it was presented to the Lord, and it was like God's cauldron. It was like, this dish here belongs to Jesus, and it's Jesus's offering his food. Don't touch it. Hophni and Phinehas would regularly go over with forks. I'll take that.
Oh my gosh, man. Taking what was theirs.
Dude. And they had
taking what wasn't theirs.
Tons that was, So, and what else is interesting too is it says when
Eli. A lot
Eli,
to be learned from this.
Yeah. When Eli died, it says he was old, he couldn't walk, and he couldn't see. He'd become blind over time, which is very prophetic.
Sure.
And it says when they brought the news to him, your sons have died and the ark has been lost. It says he fell over backwards and broke his neck and died. That's how he died.
Oh my gosh.
But what's interesting about that, though, is the Lord let Eli reign, so to speak, as a priest up until the very end. He gave him his whole lifespan. And I believe if he would have, kicked him out and taken care of his sons, cool, someone else would have stepped in. But the Lord was like, I'm not willing to let the priesthood be passed on to these jerks. Like, no way. God is so patient. But I've said this to you before, maybe you've heard me say this wrong, but every now and then someone will pop up and I'm like, whoa, that's not right. And you see someone in the church and you're like, that's weird. That's not right. And I go, 10 years. I'll just say 15 years. Give them 20 years. Because if people don't change their ways and get right, it will catch up with them. Mm-hmm. And we see that in Scripture over and over and over. And the crazy thing is the FBI is not in charge of bringing correction to the church. The Lord can use the FBI, but the Lord himself steps in and takes care of business. And that's something I never want to be on the bitter end of that stick. Like, no, thank you. And I think what these guys lost was that what we're talking about, you're probably feeling it right now if you're listening, the fear of the Lord. Mm-hmm. Is a very wonderful, wonderful thing.
Well, what it makes me think of too is like,
absolutely.
What it makes me think of too is that all of us at some point in our lives are on the end of that stick. It just depends. With your own dad, there were moments where he'd give you a look and that was warning 1. And
hopefully it works.
And then he'd get up and that was warning 2.
Uh-oh.
And then there'd be a point where he'd unlatch his belt, show's over.
That was it. Done. Yeah.
Like if I pull the belt out, the belt can't go back in, right? It's like when a cop starts writing the ticket, like it's already done, show's over. So my point being is that it's not, our dads are kind and gracious, and like the word says, if your father's being wicked, know how to give good gifts. Good dads are going to give you a few warnings. I'm not just going to, pull the belt out first thing without even telling you, hey, let's not do that.
Right.
But there's all of these and what I think is important for us to always remember, the Lord loved Eli. Mm-hmm. The Lord loved his sons. So it wasn't this point where it's like these idiots can't. There was a part of the Lord that was like, I want your heart back. I don't have your heart. And so I know that, to your point, like there were opportunities that the Lord was like, hey, you don't have to it's not about like, oh, I want you to go correct your sons and make sure that they know they screwed up. The Lord wanted to reconcile Eli to his sons and get that family straight and get the sons back in right standing with their father, and then ultimately getting all of them in right standing with God. Mm-hmm. So I think there's even part of that too that's important to remember in all of this, is that this isn't the Lord being like, hey, you're my enemies. Mm-hmm. There's only one, which we can understand when you look at the entirety of the word. There's one clear enemy who God does not like. That is the enemy. People can be affected by that enemy and can be tempted, coerced, seduced by Satan. And it's the enemy at work in them. But the humans themselves are not God's enemies. The Lord is trying to, hey, come on, you're being deceived. You're missing it. That permissiveness that started happening in the temple or the tabernacle, the Lord had the desire to get them in right standing. Hey, let's not do that. So that's my ultimate point, is like, I'd be a bad dad if the first time Jude did something that I didn't want to, I was like, all right, no video games for a week. Well, dude, I didn't even know that was no, I'm going to hey, let's not do that.
Right.
Hey, I know you're joking around. Don't talk to mom like that. And then he does again.
But
hey,
man,
you know what I'm saying?
At some point though, he has to know that you mean business.
100%.
Right?
And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
My point of having to follow through with what I've told you are the consequences. That's the most loving thing I can do as a father.
Absolutely. And it gives him a firm foundation to stand on. Like, I know where my dad stands. Mm-hmm. He's not mashed potatoes, but he's.
And those two boys, Hophni and Phineas, I think deep down probably desired their dad to come in and say, what are you doing in here?
Well, they needed him to.
They absolutely needed him to, because he was the OG. You knew a great-great-grandpa Aaron,
who had to do the same thing with his sons. Like the Lord put his sons to death for a false offering as well.
Yes.
So
crazy.
That's a very fascinating thing. See running through this is the father's love and the fatherly role that's important in this. Is that if Eli steps in and does his role as a father, we put out this fire immediately.
Sure. Man, and then you see the trickle down, like micro to macro. One family trickles into Israel, trickles into Israel's worship, trickles into like the whole country being led astray, all of God's people being led astray, all from
David and Solomon,
all from Eli. Not that it was all on him, like you mentioned earlier, but certainly his abdication of his fatherly role to discipline his kids and to lead them in the way of the priesthood led to a huge macro effect of disobedience for the whole country, where God stepped in and renewed their worship. And certainly, David, through David, they experienced, far greater than they had ever lost, right? Whenever God restored the ark back to Jerusalem, they had a prosperous, a great time of peace and of national prosperity. So it wasn't like it was all lost forever, but it certainly was there's a lot of things that had to happen first in order to get things right again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Revival had to break out.
I don't know how we get back to songs.
Right. Yeah. It might be a hard break. Okay,
this was really good.
Back to David's songs.
Fast forward a month from now, it's going to be part 28.
Uzzah again.
Bro, but like, I don't know. I feel like the songs being sung probably were not great, if I had to guess. But then, as we see, once David... Because you have to realize, when David starts doing his research with the priests and the scribes, he would have started connecting these dots that we're connecting right now with our listeners. Mm-hmm. And he would have been like, oh my gosh, we really messed this up bad.
Yeah.
I'm shocked we're all still here.
Sure.
I'm shocked that God hasn't killed us all. Well, sorry, but you know what I'm saying. The tornado, whatever way you want to look at it, that we're not all gone. And those poor farmers who all just died when they peeked into, they opened it up. They touched it and opened it up.
These dudes didn't even know what was about to happen.
Boom.
Right.
And I love, though, what that one guy did. I forgot his name, but Eleazar, how someone knew their Bible somewhere, and he consecrated his son. He's like, you know what, son? We're out here in the woods, kind of like in Delhart, so to speak, as Delhart is to Texas. That's literally where this city was in like Israel. Mm-hmm. We're on the fringes here, but I'm going to consecrate you, and here's what you do, and here's what you definitely don't do, as the law says, and you're going to watch over this thing. But what's crazy is as David was connecting all these dots, going back to what I was saying originally, is his songs like radically shifted. And I just wonder if maybe these lackadaisical songs that are not awesome, and when you read them out loud, you're like, that just sounds like a Bryan Adams song. I wonder if that is the effect of, I'm just throwing it out there, we're not taking entirely seriously what we've been tasked with doing. And the more serious we get about it and living that life you were talking about, Teal, if our songs are going to change, and our reverence and the holiness of God and those types of things in our songs is just going to rise and rise and rise.
Well, I'm going to look this up because I want to make sure I have this right. You'll keep going.
Just throwing it out there. If I don't have my phone on me, but one of my buddies, I'm going to quote here. He's a awesome.
This is what I was. So to your point, when you're talking about these songs that are full of emotion and not taking into account the reverence of who God is, it makes me think of Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. That's what it makes me think of, is like, if you want to filter me, the holy presence of God, through your feelings, to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. That's how, if that's how you want to filter me, is through your emotions, that's the exact outcome you're going to get. You're going to get this emotional, weak, frail God.
Temporary.
Temporary.
Fragile.
a relationship that's all contingent upon
transactional.
emotion.
Yeah.
And you can put that through any other kind of emotion. If your emotions are this staunch and hard, then you're going to filter God through that thing, where God is hard and far off and distant and performance-based.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I bring this up is that the way that I feel has almost got to be it has to be secondary to what the word says.
Must be the cart.
So it's like you've got to, I know this is not probably the right word, you've got to compartmentalize your emotions and set them aside. What does the word say about who God is? And if my emotions don't line up with that, my emotions change, not God.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think what is happening in a lot of songs is that God is being or attempting to be reshaped and molded to fit into the emotions that I'm currently feeling.
Bro, that's so
Sure,
good with
for
that
sure.
verse in there. Can you read that one more time?
Yeah. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind, to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. So his ways and his deeds. It's very interesting. Because your emotions, if you live emotionally, that's going to come out in your behavior, the way that you, you know what I'm saying? Like if you're a highly emotional person, that's going to come out in poor decisions.
Oh,
you know,
dude.
I'm trying to think about myself in my young 20s when I was just all emotions, no breaks. It was just all emotions. So many bad decisions, so many according to his ways, Teal's ways, and according to the fruit of his deeds. This is the fruit of the thing you chose.
Yeah.
You were emotional. You reached out to so-and-so.
Sheesh.
You know what I'm saying? Like
To
all of those
reward
things.
everyone according to. Oh, I've never seen that in the end of that verse.
It's a good, like a real simple theology of worship there, right? Whatever you worship, you will become. So when you worship
I want
your
my
emotions,
worship to be on a rock solid
you
base.
become emotionally dependent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
it's no wonder why we see so much emotional, mental health things going on, because we're so fixated on it, and we worship it essentially, right? Above all things is how I'm feeling, how I'm thinking, and whenever we do that, we're going into Jeremiah 17:10 territory that the Lord's giving us according to our ways and according to our deeds.
Well, we've removed accountability from your feelings.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? So that's the
shaky. It
it becomes so shaky because if accountability makes me feel bad about the way that I'm feeling, then I've got to reconcile that. So society as a whole has started to say, absolutely not. You may not hold me accountable. You have two options. You can either support or praise how I feel. And so people are worshiping themselves. They themselves become the idol.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is what I think is fascinating about this. The enemy, Satan, has convinced lots of people not to worship him, but to worship themselves. And by worshiping themselves, by proxy, they are worshiping him.
Isn't that,
Which is fascinating because because that's ultimately was the downfall of Satan was I'm pretty legit in my own right here, God. I can stand up next to you. That's the fall of Satan. That's the fall of Adam and Eve. You can become like gods, little g's, setting yourself up against the holy God. So the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. That's what the word says about your emotions, your feelings, your desires. All of those things have to be filtered through the word and the presence of God. If there's anything left after filtering it through those things, then that's worth keeping. But if my feelings and my emotions and my preferences seem to fight against the presence of God, that has to go. Mm-hmm. But what is happening in society is the presence of God is still a standard, and that standard makes people feel uncomfortable. Because that standard has to make you ask, you might be wrong. You know, and not to quote Talladega Nights, but Ricky Bobby's like, I built my life on that. Yeah. You know, he's like, if you're not first, you're last. He's like, Well, sure you can be. You can be second. You can be third. Shoot, you can be fourth. You know, like he goes through that. But I laugh about that because that's what people are building their life on is, well, my feelings come first. My emotions, you know, how I'm feeling about it. I need to feel a certain way to be happy. And I will say this. I want to be very clear in the way that I'm communicating this. This isn't just the world, quote unquote, non-Christians. I come into contact, and I myself wrestle with this.
Sure.
There's certain days when I wake up and I don't feel like reading my Bible. I don't feel like praying. I don't feel like doing those things. But what I have to remind myself is the presence of God, the word says what it says. If my emotions and my feelings don't line up with that, I don't change the word. I don't change the presence of God. I change my emotions the way that I feel.
Yeah.
Which makes me think of how just trying to jump right back in. But what that makes me think of is some of my most, like, I've led worship before, and I know this has happened with you guys, and someone comes up after and they're like, my son was filled with the Holy Spirit during worship, or my leg was broken and now I'm running, and it happened during worship. Meanwhile, I'm up there not feeling a thing.
Dude,
angry.
Yeah, I'm so glad you went to this.
Like, I had an argument with my wife before.
Yeah.
Or I don't feel any goosebumpers. You know, nothing's going on. And yet, after worship, all these miracles happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, so I think in that, as I'm sitting here listening to us talk, I'm like, what if God's trying to show me something through that? I should be asking why. Why? Like, why when I'm on like some emotional high after worship and it was like awesome, do I think that was a great set, yet when clearly signs and wonders and miracles are happening, the things that are the fruit of the kingdom of God being near according to Jesus himself, and I don't feel anything, I'm kind of disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And my disappointment is rooted in, it's actually not about you, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dude, that's...
Which is so, hello.
That is very, very true, because that, again, you go back to the idea of like filtering your feelings and emotions through the presence of God, and it's like, was there fruit of God's presence? Yeah. Did people have their lives change? Yeah. Did people get saved? Yeah. Well, I didn't feel anything. So?
What's that got to do with it?
Yeah.
Right,
Nobody
right.
asked you.
Right,
You know what
right,
I'm
right.
Like that whole concept of like, well, if it was good, then I would have felt something too. No. Because you even think, I mean, roll this thing all the way back to the traveling tent. I'm sure the amount of sacrificing they're doing on a daily basis, it couldn't just be all like signs and wonders and lightning and thunder constantly. Like there were some days where it was just like, this is my job. This is my thing. You've brought, that's great. It's good to see you. Like,
Bah.
I mean, like that whole thing is like you're doing, and then there would have been sometimes where you're like, whoa, because think about it, the Day of Atonement, the one day a year, and you go into the Holy of Holies. So think about that. In 365 days, the high priest is experiencing the raw, unadulterated power of God. One day out of the entire year.
Man, what was that like?
Do the other 364 days negate the one? No. Do you do all the 364 to get to the one? I don't know. Sure. But I don't know.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like the proof and evidence of feeling the presence of God is not why we continue to do it. Right? That's why God's presence doesn't filter through our emotions. Our emotions filter through the presence of God. Because I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I think in my younger days, when I was an immature worship leader, that I shouldn't say when I was an immature worship leader, because I still wrestle with this, but when I was younger, this was a regular thing of like, oh man, this, like, we'd be at like a youth service and like something broke out and it was amazing. Oh man, we got to do that again next week. Well, shoot. Now we're chasing the moment. No longer are we chasing Jesus.
Right.
So now we're fitting Jesus into the service box. Okay, what did we do in that service that was so profound. Let's do it again. Well, now we're trying to mold Jesus into, we did these 4 songs and then this guy prayed. Have him pray every time. Who spoke?
He carried the
spoke,
cart this way. Yeah.
Exactly. Like,
start getting this something dangerous. Yeah.
That was last week. That was last week that worked. God has a deep desire to do something new this week. So we get back up here and we do service week in and week out and week in and week out. You're not trying to chase the previous week's high. God, what do you want to do this week? I don't know. I mean, dude, I will say this honestly. Those big, powerful knockdown, drag-out moments, I don't think I could sustain them every single week.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really hard because we all know this. When we've had some of those like powerful, we have Zion services, which happen at the beginning of every year. We've had some Zion services where I go home like knocked out, and the next day I am worn out. I can't do that. I don't know if I can physically do that every single week.
Right.
So there's almost like a grace that's built into it where the Lord's like, hey, guess what? It was just totally normal for you. And while it was normal for you, I was knocking out all these people in the back.
Yeah, for sure.
And in the week that it's knocking you out, all these people in the back are just having a great time. And that's how I work. Because I do what I want, with who I want, how I want, when I want.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I love that you brought that up because it is so important to mention that because that the feeling and emotion thing is just it's deceitful.
Yeah.
The heart is deceitful.
Sure.
And wicked above all things.
Well, it gives you freedom from not having to feel something every time or
It's
feeling
so
guilty
great.
for not feeling something
You
or
can be
this kind of
normal.
like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm just going to come and I'm going to sing these songs to the best of my ability today as an offering to the Lord. And
Sure.
if I'm emotionally feeling it, great. If I'm not, I'm still going to sing them with passion and execute them and trust that the Lord's doing work that I just,
Well, think
I'm
about how much it
feeling
would
it.
mess up your relationship if your wife, every time you went out on a date, was like, I hope this is like our wedding.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
And you're like, what? You're like, well, you wowed me on our wedding day, so I hope you can keep up with that. And you're like, I can't do that every time we go out. Like sometimes we're going to go walk the mall, get a pretzel, and go home because that's all I can manage.
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Annie Ann sounds good right now.
But dude,
brother.
but the point is, I'm spending time with you.
Yeah.
But if I get locked into how we spend, like now I'm filtering Katie through, well, it better wow me like it did, our first date when we just stayed up till 4 a.m. talking about all the amazing stuff. Well, we haven't, I think this is why, not to go off on this tangent. This is why so many marriages end up imploding is because it's like, well, it's not magical anymore. Yeah. No kidding.
That's the point.
The morphine is worn off.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got to do the work. Now you got to do the stuff. Now you have to start sacrificing. Now you have to start putting them first
For sure.
because the morphine's wearing off.
Dopamine.
All those things. But what my point being, like, you go in and get surgery and you leave, and you're like, man, broke my leg, doesn't even hurt. Yeah. The morphine will wear off at some point.
This is true.
And then you got to start doing physical. You have to do all that stuff to build it up. You're doing the same thing with your relationship with the Lord. So if it's all about these emotional highs, these big knockdown, drag out moments, and even referencing this all back to some of David's early Psalms where it's so emotional. It's all emotion. It's like emo David. Mm-hmm. It's so hard for me. Why do you hate me? Why are you trying to squash me? And the Lord, I'm sure, is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to write all this down so that you come back and you have to see all this at some point.
Yeah.
Or
for us to look at now and look
it's
back
for
and
us
see,
to
and
look
see,
at and be like, oh my
and
gosh.
see the maturity process that
Yes.
God took him through. That's really cool.
And I wish someone had told me that or at least pointed it out. Hey, Phil, yes, these Psalms are very emotional, but have you considered the timeline?
That timeline is pretty amazing.
Of David's process and growing up. And also, too, I want to bring this into this feelings stuff into and how, God will move and do all these crazy miracles literally on days when I'm like, I didn't even feel like I was there. What? Like, let's tie that now into songs. There are some songs we sing that are kind of dry, but they've got the gospel in them.
Oh man, come on now.
And they might be dry and old, but they've got theology and right thinking and right approaching of God in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not feeling the thing, but it's talking about God correctly versus this, whatever. And thank God emotions wear you out after a while, or else we might live here forever. But these things come and go pretty quick. But these like really emotional, but I'm again, like we talked about in the last week, it's like, where's God in this?
Yep.
Where, what is this? It's kind of like this like marsh, this swamp, lyrical swamp, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's like
where all the ground feels the same.
Yeah.
Am I close to the shore? Am I in the middle? Am I getting further?
Is that an alligator?
Yeah. Well, what it makes me think of is we've cracked it back open a couple times, but we've gone back to, we've done Heart of Worship a couple times. And there's something, when you read those lyrics, those have like the emotional feel good in that song is non-existent because of what the song is about. When the music fades and all is stripped away and I simply come, longing just to be, longing something to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, or a song in itself is not what you have desired. That for a worship leader to sing that pre-chorus undoes all of the emotional calisthenics that we go through trying to generate these powerful moments. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have desired. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You search much deeper within than the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. Mm-hmm. I'm coming back to the heart of words. I mean, you sing a song like that, the emotional feel goods are gone. Because what it does is it's stripping, we talk about the thing beneath the thing, or the thing is not the thing. Mm-hmm. It's the thing underneath the thing, underneath the thing, underneath the thing. And then you get down there and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing all this worship leading to make myself feel better. And I need people to tell me that I'm doing a good job because the presence of God really isn't enough. And I don't know, you start going through that. That's the stuff God's trying to God's trying to get
Let's
to.
take the gloves off. Can I take the gloves off?
Go ahead.
If I'm being real, when I was younger, a lot of times when I was picking these highly emotional, before I started thinking about what I was singing, there was something in my heart that wanted to manipulate the room into an experience that would leave them saying, wow, that was awesome, and that guy is awesome.
Dude, you are gloves fully off. Because I completely connect with that. Like that.
So real.
There's a desire for people to walk away and be like, man, that guy's got something.
Worship leaders, I hope you're listening.
And I will say,
Talon, make it a highlight.
It's not, I think too, what's important about this is if that's happened, it's part of it. It's part of the growing process. Mm-hmm. You've got to run into some of that ugly stuff so that you can actually come face to face with it and be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that that's what was in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm coming back to the heart of worship when it's all about you, right? Mm-hmm. It's all about you. So those moments, it's hard because you have to come face to face with, at that point in my life, I was not concerned about lifting up the name of Jesus. I was concerned about lifting up the name of Teal and making sure Teal still had a place at the table.
Yeah, sure.
When God already had promised a place at the table.
That's it right there.
You're a part of the body.
That's it.
But guess what? You can't get hung up on whether you're the liver or the elbow or the kneecap or the eyeball or the back, whatever it is. We're all a part of the body of Christ, working as a unit to bring glory to Jesus. Not to us. Because I do think, especially when I was younger, I still probably wrestle with this at times, but when I was younger, I wanted to make sure, am I doing a good job? Is what I bring to the table valuable? Do you like me? These things beneath the thing beneath it, there's all this self-value, there's all this, poor self-esteem, all of these, issues that are hung up in all of this. And I'm leading worship, trying to find the presence of God while wading through all of this junk that I don't know what to do with. And the Lord is being so gracious allowing that to happen while he's pulling, stripping things away. And the next time you get up, and the next time you get up, and the next time you lead, and you just slowly but surely, the Lord's working things out in you.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, like that, I'm so glad you said that as well. As that I think is one of those things that probably a lot of worship leaders are like, I'm never saying that out loud.
Yeah.
You have to.
Sure. Yeah.
You've got to find a place where you can be able to confront it, first of all, so then we can admit to it and God can start doing something with it. Right?
Yeah.
It's not like that's the idea here, is that it's not, you're not the first person to come face to face with, I wanted people to like me. So I picked songs so that people would think I did a good job and that I did something special. And that if I get up again, people are going to be like, oh man, if he's up, I know something good's going to happen.
Would you say that this is something that, I mean, I hate to make absolute statements, but every worship leader goes through at some point. I mean, yes. I'm not a worship leader, but I also went through that too. And,
yes.
I mean, I think it's just something, it's part of the maturing process of, and God's so gracious, like you mentioned, and kind to place you in the right place at the right time with the right authority over you to correct and to guide you through that. But I think it's something everyone, if we're honest, unless maybe someone here is just 18 years old and just has it all figured out and like is super humble. But I mean, it's part of the process of God
I think
refining.
it has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we use the example of our relationships with our wives. There were things that I didn't understand, and I was trying to achieve something. I was trying to manipulate something in my relationship with Katie to get something that I wanted, not realizing you like me. And I have to be okay with you liking me, even though I've got these hang-ups. I've got these things. You accept me, you love me. But over time, I love you that I want to work on those things, right? The dumb stuff I did at 23 when Katie and I were dating, she loved me, but I think in the back of my head, there's a part of both of us that's like, yes, but at some point, let's stop doing that, right? Yes, at some point, let's stop eating out every single night of the week and staying up till 3:00 in the morning and, getting fixated on making music till 5:00. And you know what I'm saying? Like all of those things are endearing at first. And then at some point she's like, and let's move on and let's grow up. And that there's a part of that the Lord's like, the Lord meets you where you're at. But in our process of getting to know the Lord's like, come on, come a little further. Let's talk about that. Right.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the tabernacle. These are the labor moments. Hey, let's talk about that.
Which, can I say, that's what's wonderful about, if you're not familiar with the tabernacle approach in worship, go back and listen to other episodes and go through them, because it kind of takes all of this out of it. It doesn't totally take it out of it, but it helps with the process. And one, there's already an order that's fashioned. And it's almost in a way harder to manipulate. God's still going to work on you, and you can still have those issues, of course. But what I'm saying is because there's a prescription and a way to do it, and it affects the songs you choose and the order and what's going on, it becomes more about, oh, I'm here to serve this rather than this thing is here to serve me.
Sure.
And it helps put you in a right
I wish I
frame
would
of
have had
mind.
it at a younger age.
Totally.
To help to we talk about this a lot, getting away from subjective to objective.
Right.
Like picking songs and looking at a worship set and looking at a worship event objectively as opposed to subject. Man, that was awesome tonight. What did we do? Well, you didn't do anything, right? You're not at the center of this. You're not, I will say the danger is the second we get into trying to recreate that, now you're conjuring the presence of God. Now it's like, well, if we say the things right again, right? We're right into a weird spell book. No, you say the right things, you drop the right ingredients into the cauldron, mix it up, and poof, you get these.
Those people are out there.
The Lord is looking to day in and day out. I want you to see something new about me today. Hey, the you know what I'm saying? Like you go back to the manna, when they would stash the manna, it would rot. So the promise that, or the things that God was doing yesterday, you don't just
recreate the.
You don't recreate, like, okay, I had this amazing.
What were the variables?
Yeah, I had this amazing moment with the Lord. It's like superstition. It's like, okay, I did this. I got up, I took a shower first, and I had a cup of coffee, and I did these things. And if I do all of that over again, then I have that same thing. And the Lord's like, again, I'm going to keep referencing our relationships with our wives. We don't all keep going on the same first magical date, trying to recreate. Katie and I went to Payway back when we had one.
Yep.
It was an awesome first date. We had an amazing time, talked for like 4 hours. We're in there. Can you imagine how weird that'd be if at 38 years old, I'm still like, every time we get a babysitter, I'm like, all right, I'm taking you to Payway. And she's like, I'm done with this. Like, I do not want to go to Payway anymore. I don't want to, like, but the ridiculousness of that is this idea of trying to keep recreating these, what were all the variables? I got to get everything right. I'm going to wear the same exact outfit. I'm going to do my hair the same. It's like this time capsule frozen of like, I'm going to keep trying to recreate this. And Katie all the while is like, let's make some new memories.
For sure.
Like, let's explore some other things. And the Lord's like begging, like, let's go do some other stuff. Like, great, you had an awesome night of worship. That's really cool. Next week when you do it again, don't try and conjure that up again. Let's go find the next thing.
Yeah.
I've got something new and fresh for you in this next thing. Let's go do that.
I was talking with this guy the other day who's in his 60s now, I believe. An incredible man of God, like a true prophet to the body of Christ, like sits in that seat. Everyone knows it. And he said something. He goes, some people will get stuck. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's somebody that I look at his walk with Jesus and I'm like, dang. And he just goes, glory, glory. And he says, we have to progress with God seasonally. We have to keep moving with him. And he said, I don't mean progress as in become progressive. If you're going that way, you're totally missing the whole thing. I do not mean woke when I say progressive or progress, but we have to progress in maturing.
We have to move forward.
Grow.
We have to move forward with him. God is interested in us moving forward with him, and he wants us to go there.
Yeah.
Which is such an honor. But as we all know, if we're talking wives, well, what happens with wives is we make babies, and we all have children here. Well, what's involved with raising children? A lot of dying to yourself and growing up. And there are more days that look nitty gritty and 1, 2, 3 ABC than your 4-hour first date. You still have wonderful moments, and it actually gets richer, not less rich.
Yeah,
it actually gets
absolutely.
more fulfilling, not less fulfilling. But in that, there's a lot of growing up that just happens. And I think that happens in our songs. It should happen in our songs.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when I look at the people, because some of these guys personally know them or have been around them. The people that have those deep, rich walks with Jesus that, like, after a few conversations, I'm like, whoa, you are walking with God, brother. Like, their songs are radically different than the guys that, here today, gone tomorrow, or just like, I hate to say this, but they're like spiritual Peter Pans. And they, like, can't grow up.
That's I'm going to keep that in my back pocket. Spiritual Peter Pans, where it's like you keep trying to go back to Neverland.
Yeah.
You keep trying to live in that same place. Because I can think of one, I'm not going to say the name, but I can think of one kind of worship group that over the course of the last 5 years have put out a lot of music. What I hear now sounds exactly like the first album. It's very much the exact same thing. But when I think about somebody like Matt Redman, his heart is still very knit close to God, but there is a growing up that's happened where Matt Redman's songs that are coming out now versus, not that the early ones were bad, but you can tell there is a huge progress walk with the Lord that's happening, is that he wasn't just sitting there trying to rehash the same thing. Well, blessed be the name of the Lord worked. We'll just keep doing that thing. Let's just keep churning out that thing worked. So let's keep doing that. He was like, no, man, we're going to keep going. Then we're going to get to 10,000 Reasons. Then we're going to get to, all of these other songs.
Son of Suffering.
Son of Suffering. Then you arrive at, We Praise You. and Son of Suffering, where you're like, these are songs I can't
Yeah.
even believe I'm hearing.
Same Jesus, just the bridge.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
I
man.
know.
But that I think is that really is what we're, I think, getting to in all of this, is that God's desire in us writing songs is our songs reflect the growth
Yeah.
and the progress and the maturing that God's doing in our lives. That you don't, hey, something worked, right? Still for me, one of my favorite songs that I've ever written is We Will Never Need the Cross Again. I loved it. I love everything about it. But if I was like, this is it, I'm planting my flag here, I'm just going to keep writing this song over and over again because this one hit, right? This one.
When you say the song, you mean like the formula and the type
form,
of
like
song?
Yeah. It's the most streamed song we have in our catalog is that song. Okay, so that's proof. This is what everybody likes. We're just going to keep writing this one.
Mm-hmm.
That's the banger. And the Lord's like, I have so much more for you. It's a really beautiful snapshot of what I was doing in your life, and I want to keep taking more snapshots. But we want to keep growing up, right? We don't want this Peter Pan thing where it's like, I kind of laugh a little bit. I think there was an SNL skit a long time ago where it was like Peter Pan, and it was like in his 40s, and he was like overweight and still wearing all the tights and the whole thing, and everybody's like, something about this doesn't, or like Hook, whenever he's out there trying to do all this stuff in the movie, and it's like, dude, you're old. Like the kids even say it. They're like, you're old, Peter. Like we don't want to get stuck in worship song Neverland where we're not growing up and we're not progressing through it because we get stuck in this. Well, this was a really great moment.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed this. Right. Now I know we could probably talk for another hour, but I do think we have to cut it off.
Okay.
Dang it. Because we're at at least an hour and a half right now.
At least.
So I'm going to sign us off. This has been fantastic. Again, we are Tabernacle Worship. You can find us on all social media platforms, the normal places, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all those places. We are the worship department, the worship team of Trinity Fellowship Church based in Amarillo, Texas. I'm Teal. This is Phil. This is Steven. Signing off. We'll see
Have a
you
good
later.
one, y'all.